Hey y'all, I'm Dr. Lucretia Cook, but you can call me Dr. Lala. Welcome back to another episode of the Revolve podcast where grief and loss are a journey, not a final destination. Today, we're going to talk about the power of surrender. Yep, that's what we're talking about today, right? And so when we're talking about surrendering, we're talking about surrendering to God's plan, surrendering to God's timing, right? And that sounds really, really simple, right? But for most of us, it's not nearly as easy as it sounds, right? Being able to give it to God, that should be a simple thing to do. Putting it all in His hands, that should be easy. But for most of us, it's not. And can we just be honest with ourselves and admit that sometimes putting things in God's hands is just not easy to do? Can we admit that? And so, what are we talking about when we start talking about surrender, right? Because most of the time, when we think about surrender, we're thinking about in combat, right? So, most of the time in a combat situation, when an opponent surrenders, that means they gave up. That means they're saying, you know what, you got this. I recognize my limitations. I'm going to let you have it. Right? Most of the time, that's what we think. That's what we think about. That means we're no longer willing to fight. We don't want to fight anymore. But when we're talking about surrender, right? When we're talking about in the kingdom surrender, what that looks like, that means that we're trusting God's timing, even when it doesn't match our own, right? Because His time isn't our time. And sometimes He seems to be taking His sweet time, right? It looks like allowing ourselves to feel how we feel, right? It looks like choosing rest over hustle. Because how often, when we're going through seasons of change, when we're going through seasons of grief, we're always trying to keep busy, finding one more thing to do, right? How often do we do that? It looks like letting go of how we feel like things should happen, right? We're not asking God, we're not seeking His face about what tomorrow looks like because we already have it in our minds what tomorrow is supposed to look like, right? But when we surrender, we're letting go of that and we're putting it in His hands. It also looks like being able to receive support. Because how many of us have an easy time? It's easy for us to give our time, our resources, our love, our support, but we have a difficult time receiving, right? So even that is an act of surrender, being willing to allow yourself to receive, right? And so for us, surrender isn't about giving up, it's giving in to God's timing, His grace, and the healing that's not rushed, right? Allowing God to do His work in us, right? So, again, culturally, when we think about surrender, it means that we're losing. But in God's kingdom, surrender means we're putting those things in God's hands. And it means that we are not only trusting Him with today, we're choosing to trust Him with tomorrow, right? And here's the reality. Just like anything else, healing is a process. And I'm just going to let that marinate for just a second. Healing is a process, y'all. Right? But just like most of us, we get in a rush. We have a microwave mentality. We want what we want when we want it, and we want it now. Right? Or maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the only person who feels that way sometimes. Like, God, you taking too long. Right? But do you know that sometimes that delay, that thing that we're seeing as a punishment, that thing that we're seeing as a denial, do you know that sometimes that thing is protection? Because he's able to see something down the road that we're not able to see just yet. Do you know that sometimes that thing is preparation? Because again, he sees something down the line that we can't see just yet, right? In either way, whether it's protection or preparation, he's building something inside of us during the process, right? So we can see this as a season of development. He may see that we need more time to prepare. He may see that we need protection. Because we, as we often say, in seasons of grief and loss, in seasons of change, clarity gets cloudy, right? Sometimes we can't see things for what they truly are. Our vision is blurred, right? So even this is an act of love. And I know that's hard to see, right? I know. Because sometimes, even in the natural, as children, our parents made decisions about things that we didn't quite understand at that point, and they did it because they love us. You couldn't understand it when you were 13, 14, 15, but now that you're 30, now that you're 25, you're 40, the things that our parents did when we were children, they make more sense as adults, right? And especially once you have children of your own, it makes so much more sense why our parents made some of the decisions that they made, because sometimes we were asking for things that we just weren't ready for, right? Sometimes we didn't understand that they were protecting us by saying, no, you can't hang out with this person because this person isn't making the best choices. So, no, you can't hang out with them, right? And so sometimes these decisions get made out of love and we don't understand in the moment. But as time goes on, we get a better understanding, right? And because we are in these seasons where we want to control things ourselves, we hold on to them too tight, right? And sometimes it's hard to let them go because, again, we want what we want when we want it, and we want it now, right? But here's the reality: sometimes life comes at us fast and hard, right? And because of that, we try to control every single thing that we can even remotely control. We try to control it. And sometimes that shows up look and it looks like over planning, hypervigilance, right? And we do that because it feels safer. I know, right? It feels safer when we're able to hold it in our hands because you know where it is. You feel like you can protect it, right? You can hold it. But here's the thing: when we're trying to hold on to a thing and keep it safe, we might miss what God's trying to do with that thing in that season. We miss that opportunity for Him to direct us, right? And why do we do that? Because we're afraid. So let's name that fear because that's what it is. It's fear. So we want to name that fear and we want to release it. We want to be able to let it go. Because ultimately, we don't have control. We don't. As believers, we believe that our days are pre-appointed, right? That God knows us before we're ever formed. And so ultimately, God is in control, not us. Right? So, how can therapy help us get to this place of surrender? By helping us to identify the inner blocks that we may have: fear, control, shame. These are things that keep us from being able to let go. And here's the interesting thing for me is that sometimes we try to hold on to these things as if God doesn't know already. Right? How you keeping secrets from God? Now, just what in our minds tell us that we can keep secrets from Him as if He doesn't know the things that we're afraid of, the things that we're trying to maintain control over, the things that keep us bound by shame. He already knows. But therapy can help us to identify those things, right? Therapy gives us a safe place to be vulnerable. Because being able to surrender requires emotional safety, right? In therapy, we have a space that's non judgmental. We don't have to worry about being judged in therapy, right? This is a place where we can explore the pain, the shame. We can explore those things and not have to be strong. We don't have to put on a brave face. We can let those things be what they are. Therapy is a place where we're able to learn how to reframe surrender and what that looks like. Because again, traditionally, when we think of surrender, we're thinking about giving up. We don't want to fight anymore. That's what we think about when we think about surrender, right? But in therapy, we learn how to reframe that. And so, in these instances, when we're giving things to God, when we're putting our lives and the issues of our hearts in His hands, that's an act of courage, right? That's an act of trust in the Creator. It's not weakness. It's not. It's an act of courage, right? And another thing we learn in therapy is to accept the present moment. We learn how to accept the season that we're in for what it is. We learn to acknowledge reality without judgment. And that doesn't mean we like it, right? It just means we accept it for what it is. And that's important sometimes. Because we can't heal what we won't even acknowledge exists. In order to heal it, we have to be able to call it out, right? And sometimes we have to be able to just sit with that, right? Another thing about surrender, sometimes that looks like choosing to rest. How many of us look for ways to distract ourselves, to preoccupy our minds in seasons of grief, loss, change? Because here's the truth, we live in a world that glorifies hustle, right? We live in a world where people brag on and they say, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I'm sorry, what? Right? We live in a world that tells us if we're not producing, we're falling behind. But scripture tells us different. Jesus invites us to rest. Matthew 11:28-30 tells us, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. You will find rest for your souls. Rest is relational, and it's found in intimacy with the Father, right? Rest counters anxiety. Philippians 4:6-7 says, do not be anxious, and the peace of God will guard your hearts and minds. Rest in Christ is a spiritual antidote to fear and anxiety. Right? And rest isn't laziness. Right? You being able to rest in the Father is saying, I trust you enough to pause in this moment and lean on you. Right? And so, what does our faith say about surrender? Right? Because we always combine faith and therapy, right? So, what does the Bible tell us? about surrender. Psalm 37:5 tells us to commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will do it. So, what does that mean? You don't have to carry it all, you don't have to figure it all out. You just have to trust and let God do His thing, right? Ecclesiastes 3:11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. So this is telling us we don't have to rush what God is making beautiful, right? It's not necessary for us to understand everything, to trust the process. And we were made for eternity. So don't get caught up in the trials of what you're going through today, right? And Romans 8:28 says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. This is one of my favorite scriptures. And so this one is telling us you can rest. You can rest in Him even when life is chaotic, because ultimately He's got it in control. You can trust even when the outcome is unclear. And why? Because God is actively working all things for our good. So no matter what's going on, He's working it for our good. And we can trust in that. And so these scriptures are a reminder that surrender is woven into God's promises. Right? It's woven into His promises. And His timing is always layered with love. So even though things might not be going according to our timeline, God is always right on time. Right? And that makes me think of a song that I used to hear when I was young. God may not come when you want Him, but He is always on time. Right? So then my question for you today is, what is it that you need to surrender? A timeline, a relationship, fear, right? Let's name it. Let's release it. And let's rest. Let's rest in the Father and His promises, right? Because surrender isn't the end. It's not giving up. It's the beginning, right? It's that conscious decision to put it in God's hands. And I know that's a challenge sometimes. But ultimately, He's in control. Right? And so if this episode sounds familiar, or if there's something that resonates with you, drop a heart in the chat and let me know what you need to surrender today. Let's talk about it. And so until next time, keep choosing healing. Keep choosing joy. I love y'all. Bye.